Hello to everyone. David Hibbert here from Destiny Apostolic Ministries, and my guest today, teaching guest, is Brian Sauder, who is on the international leadership team of Dove International, but he's also on our Apostolic Council. And so thank you so much, Brian. It's just such a great pleasure to have you with us today. And I've already checked your notes. There's a lot of great content. So I just want you to go right ahead and get started.
All right, so great to be here. I am just delighted. First of all, I wanted to just start off by probably talking a little bit about myself, because I'm aware that probably a lot of people who are taking this seminar don't know who I am or never heard of me, or somebody recommended it to you. So I am, just as I was preparing, I realized how uniquely qualified I am to talk about conflict. That was brought back like a few painful memories of conflict. And anyway, it's all good. It's all been resolved. And sorry, here, I'm just going to start a clock. And there we go. So that being what it was, it was good. I feel like I have some amazing things that are practical tools. And so let me first of all start off talking a little bit of like a biography about myself, and then we can get into, I wanted to give an overview of this seminar that we're doing, and then we'll just launch right into the first session here and kind of get things started and kicked off. So David already introduced me as Brian Sauder. I'm on the International Apostolic team with Dove International, and I am married for 35 years. And I think I checked that number this morning. And I have it written down here. Yeah, 35 years, yes. And my wife always knows that number. I'm always pretty close, so you know how that goes. But in any case, married for 35 years with 5 children, now all adults, 2 in college. And so we have experienced conflict in parenting. We have raised kids, we've had sports teams, we've had conflict with coaches, you name it. Like we've had kids that were in band and they're just doing stupid stuff. The leaders of the band, the marching band, where you play instruments and march around the field at the middle of in the middle of a American football team or football game. And, so my daughter was in marching band for, 4 years. And then last year she was like the drum major, which means she was the person like responsible for leading the marching band. And so we've had many experiences in conflict with like teachers and administrators of schools and principals. Basically just related to our family. Of course, we've had, as anyone of you who are parents would know, that from little on up, there's always conflict in parenting as well. And some of that conflict is between you and your spouse, or you don't have that if you're a single parent, but that is important to iron out differences between mom and dad before you present anything to the children. And so we'll be talking, I'll be using plenty of examples from that, as well as I was elected. I was elected to our public school board here I'm in, first of all, Manheim, Pennsylvania, here in southeastern Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half from Philadelphia, and in the USA. And we have had many still involved in many areas of leadership. I have many leadership experiences, bachelor's of science in industrial engineering, a master's in organizational leadership. So I've just picked up some learning along the way as well. And as I mentioned, here locally, I was elected to local government, a public office, for 9 years. And the office is that of a school board. So I was on a school board member for 9 years, and through various ups and downs, through various controversies, I was president of the board for 2 years. I'll probably share a little bit about that. And as we go forward, some of the examples through these sessions are absolutely, well, they're all probably true life, real examples from myself and others that I've learned from. And so I literally, when I was the president of the school board, had a meeting over a controversy in our school district having to do with a building that was being used, too much detail to go into now. It was going to be closed, where I literally had 300 angry parents that were, I was in front of this room and there was 300 angry parents there that were asking me questions, shouting questions out, shouting criticisms. And it got so unstable that they actually called the local police in to, just in case what was happening there. So I've experienced some conflict and I survived. And we actually saw a resolution to that situation. We'll be talking some more about that. And David or others will have to remind me if I don't cover all these things that I'm talking about here. But for over 30 years, and I've been involved in church leadership, where leading small groups of elders. Right now, my wife and I are elders in our local church, as well as apostolic ministry, working with very strong leaders. A lot of times, very strong leaders have very strong ideas, and there's conflict of ideas. And how does that get resolved? And how does the organization move forward? How does the church move forward? In our situation, how does our family move forward if we have obstacles? So that all of those leadership lessons have kind of poured into much of what we're going to be talking about in these 6 sessions that we're going to be doing. And so we have, I was also, again, more of my bio information, not trying to impress you, just trying to give you my life that qualifies me to talk about resolving conflict. As well, I've been on various business boards. I remember sitting, I'll tell you once more about another example. I was sitting in a board meeting where literally, this was a business board meeting of business people, and literally the one guy was so angry that he reached across, he almost crawled across the board table to get at the guy on the other side. Like, he was that angry. He was furious. He leaned forward and tried to reach the guy. Probably would have hit him if the table wouldn't have been there. And but we know that he learned from that situation. We helped him, and we learned and so forth. And so I've had various issues. I've had letters to the editor written about me when I was in public office. Mr. Sauder, you should resign from the school board. Appeared in our local newspaper, on the front page of the newspaper, above the fold, with different controversies. And so I'm happy to say I can still see most of those people. Others I just don't see, but I can still see, well, I should say, as it's up to me, I can still see all those people on the street and talk to them, not turn and be angry and turn the other way. But I can see them, and I can honestly say, and my wife is a witness, that I have endured all of those things and successfully successfully learned my mistakes, successfully corrected other people when it was their mistakes. And I am still full of God's love and full of joy. My Christian life, and still involved in many levels of leadership, is a joy-filled experience, as it should be. And so we've had, that is, quote, sometimes I would think, unfortunately, I was just thinking through as I was preparing this week, all of these experiences. I'm like, wow, that was painful. Like, oh, that wasn't that, I made a mistake there. And so we're going to look at all that. Like, what can we do to resolve conflict? What is things that other people are doing? I have some exercises for us to do at the end of each session. What is out of our control? And the scripture that comes to me is that we're instructed, we'll look at this a little deeper, to be at peace with all men as it's up to you. It's kind of a loose paraphrase. And so we do everything that we can, and there's some things that other people just, they can be angry at us the rest of their life, and there's nothing we can do about that. We still have to, when we forgive, we're released, and so forth. And just as I was preparing too, for those that are watching online, even or those that are in a room with other people, we'll have some exercises to walk some of these things out. Maybe learn, maybe become self-aware of things that are tendencies that in our own lives that need to be resolved, or even be aware of our own personality, and et cetera. And that will help us be better people, as well as it will help us be better at life. And we'll just have more of a joy-filled life. And I just prophetically even felt like that some watching are going to find the keys to resolve conflict, that conflict that's been going on for many years. So I feel like even beyond 10 years that there's situations where you're not talking, or there's been conflict, ongoing conflict for that long, maybe in family, or maybe otherwise, maybe in business world, or whatnot. And I feel like they're just in these sessions, you're going to get the tools that will help you to break that blockade of that conflict that's been there for that long, and for those years. So in any case, that's just kind of a bit of, I want to go specifically, that's a little bit about what we're going to be doing in these sessions. I want to go quickly over the sessions. I'm going to start off the first session, which is why is conflict so difficult? And we're going to kind of do a little bit of an overview, and kind of get used to the idea. The second session is actually, it started out as 8 causes of conflict, but when I started to list them, I actually ended up with 12, and probably there's some more that I missed, and you can maybe contribute to that discussion. The third session is a biblical response to conflict. And that's where we're going to look at the scriptures to see how, as Christians, would handle these kind of situations. The fourth session is basic methods of resolving conflict. So we actually have like a 6-step plan to work through. Like, I can identify that I am in conflict with this person at church, or this neighbor right here. That's another good area to work out conflict, is with the neighbors. So you got property lines. I got one neighbor who has this ugly shed on the back of his property. He doesn't even see it, but it's the ugliest thing. And it's got like, it's not painted. It's fallen apart. It's actually, the wood is rotting. And that's what I see on my property, but he never sees any of that. The front is nice and it's all painted and whatnot. So I'm dialoguing with him. I'm like, hey, why don't you come around the back here and look how bad that shed looks? That's what I see all the time. So we got stuff with neighbors, and so whatever. There are many areas that we could have conflict in, and just very practical things. And so I'm going to present you with a 7-step process that will be, I believe, helpful, that you can just simply follow. And then I have a specialized 7-step process for, I think it's 6 or 7. We'll be unpacking all of this, a specialized 6 or 7-step process for marriages. So if you're married, you and your spouse, which I got from Steve Prokopchek. Steve Prokopchek is also, actually his office is just right over here in the Dove International office. He's a counselor. He does a lot of counseling with leaders and leadership, and just he's written numerous books on marriage. And so he gave me this workshop, for this seminar, he gave me a 7-step process to follow through when you find yourself in conflict in marriage. Okay. So that is a big area. And then the next session is going to be about understanding your conflict style. Like, what are your tendencies, or how do you react? And so if we become self-aware, we become a stronger individual. We become a stronger person, so that we are not, we can act instead of react. Okay. So if you're trying to follow notes, this is all pre-rambling to the notes, but we will be getting to these notes here in just a little bit. So that's session number 5, understanding your conflict style. And number 6 is how to prosper in all of your relationships. And then I actually have a bonus session, which is preventing conflict. So I know we only have 6 sessions in this seminar, so I'll probably just be referencing that kind of bonus session. And there's a real practical tool which I've learned, and it just talks about how to have a difficult conversation, how to approach a hard to approach conversation with difficult, maybe bad news, maybe news that the person you're going to be talking to is not wanting to hear, not going to hear. So that it's kind of, I guess I would call that how to have a crucial conversation when the stakes are high and things could go wrong at work, or the neighbor could blow up. And we're just going to talk about that they're preventing conflict. So how to be preemptive and preventing conflict. And so that's just a bit of an overview of the seminar. Our purpose, I have in your notes there, is to help identify and understand conflict, provide techniques for improving conflict resolution and communication skills. So we know that a lot of conflict comes because there's miscommunication or poor communication. And so we understand that their conflict does exist. It's going to be in our lives. That conflict is going to be a part of. We can't live life. And I would always say, if you don't have any conflict, it probably means you're a introvert, a hermit living in a cabin up in the woods. And even then, you might have conflict with a bear or, wolves or something like that. So conflict in life is pretty much unavoidable. It does and will exist. And even it's like Jesus said, offense will come. Like, it wasn't a question. Like, you would have the opportunity to be offended. And so I think all of us in this seminar would be aware of that. And I'm not telling you something you don't know. And hopefully provide you some techniques, even some manners of speaking, some sentences that are used to defray conflict and to deflect tension in some of those tense situations. But the thing is that we want to not let conflict unresolved. We want to face it. We want to grow in our ability, because there's this, I think in the area where I grew up, there's like a strong tendency. It's kind of conservative farming community. And there's a strong tendency to be passive aggressive. And even in some, it's not just in Pennsylvania, but in some Asian cultures, they'll agree with you to your face, but they walk away and they disagree with you. But they'll never talk to you directly about it. They'll go back around and talk to somebody who talks to somebody who talks to you. And yes, very poor communication skills. And that doesn't help anyone. In fact, it really leads to a lot of people getting involved in situations that really wouldn't have to and wouldn't need to. And so we want to, by being direct in our communication, we want to avoid that passive aggressive, non-confrontational lack of skill in communication. That's really toxic in relationships, I would say. So, probably there might be one or two people in this seminar who say you like conflict, but most of us do not enjoy conflict. I do not enjoy conflict. It'd be much easier for me to walk away. But I know that's not the right thing to do. It's not the mature thing to do. It's not the appropriate thing to do as a believer. So maybe, if you're the person who goes around seeking conflict with that 1%, seeking conflict with people and bossing them around and telling them what to do, well, then maybe you need to back off. But for most of us, we need to learn skills that manage conflict when it comes up, and things start to get better. And the kind of a backdrop for this whole thing I love is just we'll look at all the scriptures, but from Genesis, we understand that all people are God's creation. And I've always loved this. To me, this is one of the great of the biblical worldview. One of the great tenets of the biblical worldview is that all humanity is created by God. So whether they're your neighbor, or whether it's your boss or a coworker, or somebody at church, the head usher at church, or a street person you just met on the street that is homeless, and everyone is God's creation. And so because of that, they should be treated with respect and with dignity. And that gives us a backdrop for resolving conflict. So that helps us. I think it's going to be very helpful. And I would just say, have it in your notes that you're going to be a better person because that's this seminar. I believe, and if you just respond appropriately or honestly, let me just say honestly, to the questions, to the discussion things that I put out there, it's going to help you to process. And I believe that we will see breakthrough in some conflicts that have been longstanding, as I mentioned before. But we know that God made people uniquely, and He made them different, and that all humanity is God's creation, as I mentioned. So it's appropriate that different people with different gifts and different talents are going to have different opinions, and so that is good. That's a good thing. In many of my leadership teams, what I'm involved with, especially I'm on teams, but I'm also leading teams. I'm looking for people that have a different perspective than myself, because I already have the Brian Sauder glasses. So for it to be, if I have 6 other people on my team that have the same Brian Sauder glasses, then it's going to be a weak team. But if I have other people around me, let's say Dave Hibbert's on my team, I have David Hibbert's glasses. He has a different perspective. And maybe I have Kathy Hibbert on my team, and she's going to have a different perspective. And so I can learn from them. The things that I don't see, they will see, and other team members as well. And so literally our team becomes stronger because of the diversity and the uniqueness. And if I'm in a meeting, leadership meeting, and Dave says something that I don't like as we're trying to make decisions on a board or whatever, I could just get mad at him, and I could just say, we're not doing that, and that's fine. Or I could actually listen to his perspective. And we still might do my direction, but it's going to be a better decision if it's vetted by the views of others. And likewise, I think we'll be better and stronger individuals if we listen to the views of others. We might not agree with them, but we can understand why they think what they think, and that helps us to grow. And so our areas of conflict, we already talked about. Like, one of the things that I work with is part of my job is overseeing pastors and apostolic leaders in the nation of India. Well, in India, the Christian churches are still in a minority. It's still 85% Hindu, and of course there's a caste system, and so you're kind of working against that. So some conflict is unavoidable. First of all, the gospel is a stumbling block to the unbeliever. It's meant to be a stumbling block to get their attention, I believe. But also in a nation like India, our converts are now getting married, and a Hindu convert is now marrying somebody who's not a Hindu anymore. First of all, so that marriage is going to create a conflict because they're not a Hindu, but also they're not in their same caste system, because the Christians are coming out of the caste system. And so they're not going to, the traditional Indian thing to do would be marry within the same caste system, but the Christians are not going to do that. So that right away causes conflict with family, big conflict, and with the family. And then also they're also going to be marrying someone who's not a Hindu, which again causes conflict. And even the fact that they became a Christian is going to cause a big conflict. And so conflict is going to be there. It's just a matter of how to manage that. How can that young Hindu believer negotiate that with their parents, with their extended family members, and still forgive and still release and still remain, in spite of what they might do, remain full of God's joy and his peace and his confidence going forward. And so conflict is going to be in the world. There, Jesus said there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and we're going to talk about like what's out there, which we can't control, and what's in here, which we can control, and so that I think we'll find very helpful. But as I was studying for my master's program on organizational leadership, one of the classes had this term, which I never heard before. You might have heard it, but maybe not. It's a term. It's called emotional intelligence. And at first, we all of us would have heard, of IQ, which is your intelligent quotient, is what IQ stands for, intelligence quotient, IQ. But they say now, what I learned is that emotional intelligence, they abbreviate EQ. So you have an IQ, you could be very smart and have a lot of information in here and be an expert in your field, just intellectually, but without emotional intelligence, you won't prosper. You won't have good relationships. You're going to break relationships. You're going to get in arguments at work, and you're going to get fired, or your employees are going to, they're going to resign or go work for someone else. So it's important, this idea of emotional intelligence. So that will allow you to prosper in all of your relationships if you have the ability through the word of God, through the grace of God, to develop emotional intelligence. So I just have a definition, which I have in your notes here. Emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, or express one's emotions, to handle interpersonal relationships thoughtfully and compassionately. So that's that definition. I'll just read it again because I feel like it's really important. Emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships thoughtfully and compassionately. Compassionately. And so that, if you think about that, that's really sounds a lot like the fruit of the Spirit. Like that really sounds a lot like James, where it says, be quick to hear and slow to speak. And as we've dialogued with people, like there's these practical skills that are biblically based. Sociologists would call it emotional intelligence. Just Christians would just call it, oh, that's the fruit of the Spirit. Be gentle, kind, full of love, and so forth. So that, so here we are, just kind of wrapping that up in this term, emotional intelligence, EQ. So part of my goal for this, to use that terminology for this seminar, is that all of us would grow in our capacity to have a high level of emotional intelligence. When we're going to talk about how to receive criticism without reacting, we're going to talk about how do you compare yourselves with others. All this is going to be in different parts of the seminar. And so what the last thing there, it's not only to express your emotions, but to handle interpersonal relationships. I already mentioned that communication is a big deal, and miscommunication is maybe the number one reason for conflict is miscommunication. But we do definitely know that miscommunication or bad communication, not intentional, can lead to conflict. And so I have in your notes here this feedback loop, which I thought was very helpful. Most of the time we have something in our head that we want to communicate, but what comes out of our mouth is a little different than that, and we don't get the right words, or the words don't mean the same thing to the other individual. It's miscommunication, or it's limited. And so right away, their heads start to fill in the blanks of what we might be trying to communicate. So I have here, like, if you follow through with these things, and this kind of develops the complexity of communication. First of all, there is what you think you said, what was up here. There is then what you actually said. Then there is what the other person hears physically. And then there's also what the other person thinks they hear. Then there's what the other person says about what you said. And then there is what do you think the other person said about what you said. So all of that communication or miscommunication can happen in one interchange of you saying something and the person responding. And so that's why I'm a big fan. It's kind of one of our first lessons here, is just to understand that a feedback loop is a big part of clear communication, that there has to be a loop of feedback, and to the point of being very clear in the process of saying, what did you think I just said? Or that's not exactly what I said, but here's what I meant, and I apologize for not being clear. But a simple exchange of two communication, one person speaking, another person speaking, has all of these dynamics, and that's why it's so important to get feedback from the person, to really listen to their initial feedback, and quick to hear, the scripture says. Or when I'm counseling people, I say 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means you should listen twice as much as what you speak. In any case, just to focus on the communication process here a little bit more. There's this idea of communication, and I have it in your notes there. There's 3 important parts of your communication. The tone of your voice is 38% of the message. The words that you speak, the literal words that come out of your mouth, are 7%, important, and the nonverbal communication, like your face, your body posture, you're leaning in, you're leaning back, you're bored, or you're have bulging veins in your neck. Like your nonverbal communication, the expression on your face is 55% of communication. So you could be saying I love you, but if your face is all red and your body is on the edge of your seat, like you're ready to pounce across the table, that is, your 55% is going to overcome your 7%. So think about that, like even the tone of your voice. And I've had situations where we're interacting with my children, and they would different times say with them, like, Dad, that tone of voice, we don't appreciate that tone of voice. And I'm like, it's, I'm like, well, I don't think I was trying to communicate. I had a thought in my head, but I didn't think there was anything wrong with that tone of voice. And then they said, well, that sounds condescending to us. Now, this is teenagers, right? That tone of voice is condescending. You're looking down at us. You're belittling us with that tone of voice. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't really want to do that. I'm trying to communicate. But I don't want to be condescending. I maybe was, unintentionally, or anyway, maybe I was, that was in my heart. I'm like, well, I don't want that. So I'm going to get that out of my heart. I don't want to belittle my own kids because I always want to build them up. There's enough of negativity out in the world that we live. So I'm just going to, we always focused on building our kids up because there's enough other input in their lives that would tear them down. And so I realized, like, yeah, no, I got to somehow delete that tone of voice that is condescending. And I don't even know if I could, rehearse it here for you today. But then my kids are listening to me talk to, again, teenagers. So I want to grow and I want to get better. So my kids are listening to me talk to the repairman that is there taking care of some kind of maintenance at our house. It was the plumbing or something that was going on, or setting up the cable or whatever it was. And after the repairman leaves, he didn't do things the way we wanted them done. I'm like, hey, what about this? Like, I thought you said, anyway, it seemed like a good discussion. I was the, I grew up in retail. Like when I was in 7th grade, in school, my dad bought a store, and I have like 6 or 7 years in retail. So I'm always like, hey, the customer is always right. Change this. Like, I'm the worst at a restaurant. Like, if the food's not right exactly like I like it, I'm like, hey, could you change this? Because I ordered, potatoes and you gave me sweet potatoes or whatnot. And my wife is always like, don't worry, just eat the food. Just eat the food. All right. And but I'm like, oh no, if I was the owner of the restaurant, I would want to know that I didn't get it, that I didn't get the right order to my customer, because that customer, if you got the wrong order, there's at least some chance that they're not going to come back because they got the wrong order. So if I was that business owner, that's me thinking, and so I'm going to be thinking about that. And but that's just in me, and I have to become self-aware. We're going to talk about being self-aware here and in these sessions as well. But so I'm always like, the customer is always right. And but that's, my wife has a different perspective. She's like, hey, we are out for dinner. Don't make a scene. Enjoy the dinner. Eat the sweet potatoes. So she has a different perspective, which I want to hear, and so forth. So I had this interaction with this repair person who was in our house, and the kids are there watching, or just there in the room, whatnot. And then after the repair person left, so I'm like, I'm the customer. I'm just trying to get it right in my mind. Or my kid said, like, Dad, you used that tone of voice. I'm like, well, what tone of voice? He said, like, you used that tone of voice that is condescending. It was belittling to the repair person. I'm like, maybe I did. Like, I had to think about that. Like, and we discipline our children, we correct them. Don't get me wrong, but they were giving me input back, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that even in my intention to get the right thing done, I probably did speak in a way that was belittling to that repair person. Well, he was I was a customer, and he was he was serving us, so he couldn't really get in an argument with me, or he might have got fired or whatnot. But I realized that I needed to delete that tone of voice. So all that to say, we have our actual words, which is 7%. We have our tone, which is 38%. And we have our nonverbals, which are 55%. So that's if you're face to face. So start thinking about, what if you add technology to that? And now, instead of seeing them, and now instead of being face to face, let's say now you're texting them, or you're emailing them, or you're messaging them, sending them a message in WhatsApp or whatnot. And so now you only have the 7% communication. Well, as soon as you only have that 7% communication, what happens is and we don't have the nonverbals. So the nonverbals can be very good too. Like the tone is good, the tone is good, the posture is good, the nonverbals are good. So that can be very much adding to the communication. And like look at me now, I'm leaning in, I'm excited, I'm using my hands, trying to communicate. So that's nonverbals, but that's good. And but at the same time, that when the nonverbals are not there, the tone's not there in just written communication, it can get really, it leaves a lot of blanks. And what happens is the mind fills in these blanks. And so that can be dangerous, and it can lead to conflict. I mean, probably a lot of us would know that we were in an email conversation. We're going back and forth and back and forth. We're disagreeing in email. And at a certain point, you just have to say, hey, let's talk about this tomorrow, because you're not getting anywhere with this email communication. Let's talk about this tomorrow at staff meeting, or let's talk about this Sunday afternoon at church or Sunday morning at church. So you understand that's necessity, because just written words is not doing it. You've reached a block. In fact, I had one situation, I'll tell you more about this later. I had one situation where I was emailing pretty passionate discussion back and forth with a coworker, like blah, blah, blah. And this is why I think that, and this is why I think that, and this is why I think you should do that. And mistakenly, somehow I hit the all caps button got pushed on my email. And so in the middle of my conversation, trying to persuade this coworker, it went to all caps, and now the rest of the email is in all caps. And I didn't know it, never saw it. And I just like, bam, I sent the message. And then he kind of emailed back one sentence, and then he said, does all caps mean that you're yelling? I'm like, oh, sorry. I'm like, no, that was honestly an accident. I didn't try to make that all caps. But there it was again. There was conflict because of nonverbal, just not being face to face. So adding technology to our communication does add to the possibility of conflict. And the last thing I'll just mention here is just like a reason that a lot of our conversations, even when we're face to face and we're using technology, one of the reasons that our conversations tend to go poorly and cause conflict is this thing called adrenaline. All right. Now we know that we've all heard the stories of adrenaline. This is really good. The car falls on somebody and they get a burst of strength, and they can lift the car off of the person. And this adrenaline is a good thing. It's put there by God, and it's there for us that we can perform above naturally in certain situations. And we've all heard those stories, or maybe even experienced some of them ourselves, where just adrenaline took over and we were able to solve a problem or whatever. But what happens is, one reason that discussions, when we don't need supernatural physical strength when we're in a discussion, is that our adrenal glands, which are just above our kidneys in our human body, is biology creates us when our adrenaline starts to flow in a heated discussion. And what happens is adrenaline is trained, or adrenaline goes to your large muscle groups, because that's where your legs and your shoulders and your arms, because that's where you need adrenaline from all the blood. Adrenaline causes all the blood. Let me say that clearly. The blood goes to our large muscles, where it's kind of like we have this fight or flight mentality. We got to run. That's flight. And of course, the fight is, you can't, I am going to confront you. That's the fight side of that. So adrenaline, when we get in conflict, adrenaline pushes us to totally shut down, or to totally go off and be confrontive and argumentative and so forth. Because what happens is the very time that we need to do some complex thinking, we're in a conflict, then the brain or the blood is literally draining from our brains into our large muscles. That's the result of adrenaline, because supernatural strength is above natural strength is needed, and our adrenal glands cause the blood to flow from our head, which where we need it for clear thinking and problem solving and reaching solutions in the conflict. The blood's not there; it's out here in these muscles, and so so we have no blood in the brain when that is exactly what we need for an escalating conflict, not a physical conflict, but a personal conflict in conflict. So biology is actually against us as well when it comes to conflict. So kind of ties back into, okay, I want to have emotional intelligence so that I am able to control this. So I'm going to walk away. I'm going to calm myself down. We're going to set another time to talk about this. There's many different things that we'll learn actually as far as tools are concerned and so forth. So I have a couple of discussion questions here, and I'm hoping that you can engage these. I don't think maybe you'll be taking this seminar with a couple other people or with a group. You can actually discuss them yourself. If not, and maybe it's just for you at home watching, I just want to encourage you to write the answers down to these questions, and it'll help you to process. And I think these questions will actually build on each other in each of the sessions, so that we can see and identify some things that will really help us. So the discussion questions here are in your notes if you have the notes. Number one, how many of you like conflict? Okay, so if your answer is yes, I like conflict, then maybe we need to deal with some other things. But most of us don't like conflict, so we're probably going to answer no. No, I don't like conflict. And but the second question is a little bit more. What was the worst conflict that you ever had? Because I'd like to, for me, my teaching and your processing, I'd like you to make that worst conflict like a case study. And we're going to be referencing back to that as we learn things in the sessions. What could have we done different? What could we do that was maybe avoided that, or even go back and solve that conflict now? What was the worst conflict that you ever had? So I'm going to give you a few moments here. I'm going to turn things back over to Dave and David, and we're going to, but I want you to go ahead and write answer those two questions very thoughtfully. And how many of you like conflict? Do you like conflict? What was the worst conflict that you ever had? I'm sure it won't be hard to come to your mind the worst conflict that you ever had. It should be like right there, because we're going to use that as a case study and hopefully explore some of these things together. Back to you, David.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. That was excellent. So yeah, as Brian said, we'd like, if you're at home and you're with someone, just turn to each other for about 2 to 3 minutes and share your story, and have the other person share their story. And then if you're in the building right now, then again, turn to someone and share that number too. What is, just give a summary. Don't give your whole life biography, but give a short summary of that conflict. And because as Brian said, we're going to use that thought as we go through the rest of the seminar.